So I don't think there's a single day this year that most of us haven't thought about what it means to do remote work. And for a lot of years, we've been sort of flirting with the idea as an industry and as a society. And I think it's pretty obvious that we've been forced into that decision pretty quickly this year. And I think historians for a long time will be looking back on 2020 as the time where we had a major shift in culture that, did not return back to the accepted norm of doing expertise-based tech work, and how we were thinking about that work before and how we were thinking about that work and doing that work in practicality afterwards. I know that most of us have been thinking, is this better or worse? Or is it net better than it is net worse? What are the benefits and downsides? What are the risks that we have? First, I want to talk about some of the benefits that I think there are to remote work, and then some of the downsides, maybe how we can overcome some of those downsides. One of the major benefits of remote work is that it allows for a larger portion of society to participate in companies where they would not have had opportunities before. This is particularly beneficial for underrepresented groups or folks that wouldn't have thought about it because the barrier of entry seemed too high. It's too scary to leave the life they knew or leave family and friends or church networks or other things that make life more valuable or easier to live, right? I know for us, having friends and family close to help watch our son when we need is a huge deal. It's so moving. And losing that seems like a bad idea. Remote work helps to get around that. We also found this year that when we went remote as a company, we tracked things like efficiency as quantitatively as we could, right? So the velocity and burn down rate for tasks, bugs, design tasks, things like that. Quantitatively, people got more efficient. They got faster. They did more in a shorter amount of time working remotely. And then we had ways of tracking these things qualitatively through survey data. And what people told us through that information, through those surveys, was that they felt faster and more efficient, less distracted by working at home. So people were able to get more done and have more value put out in less time. So that's another benefit, is like there's more opportunities for people, especially for underrepresented groups that wouldn't have those opportunities otherwise. And people feel more efficient at home, right? They can get things done more quickly. It sort of goes without saying that life balance is a lot easier to achieve potentially remotely. Like I can spend every lunch hour with my son, and that fills me up as a human being, helps me feel better about life and things and where I'm spending my time. Another benefit is that we potentially cut back on things like carbon gas emissions. It's better for the environment. A VC call certainly has a lower carbon footprint than a flight. We also see that here in Salt Lake, where we have really bad air. Quantitatively, we've seen a drastic decrease in the amount of particulates in the air because people just aren't driving as much, right? There's so many few people, so many less commuters every day. One of the other major benefits of remote work, especially for those of us that are really steeped inside of a tech culture and that live in really like a microcosm of its own, a society and a culture in and of itself, where our shared experiences are different, quite different from the people we're building products for. If you make over $100,000 and you live in a home you own, or an apartment you own, or you rent an apartment that you have to rent with 4 other people to afford it because it costs $10,000 a month. Your experience is obviously, you know this, drastically different from most of the people we're building products for. You build and ship something that didn't consider something that you should have considered, that you would have considered if you would have had somebody involved on your team that had a background or an experience that would have illuminated a problem you didn't see. Sometimes this is really apparent, and sometimes the stakes are pretty low. Like when Twitter shipped new media options for their platform and forgot to include functionality for folks who were visually impaired because there was nobody on their team that thought about it. You know, they didn't ask folks who were visually impaired or didn't have people with that sort of background or expertise. That's a pretty low risk problem that highlights a larger problem, which is that when you don't have people of various backgrounds on your teams, when you don't have people on your team that represent a good portion of the folks you're designing for, or minor cases that you should consider in order to design better products, you run into big issues. And forgetting something for the visually impaired is a big thing, right? That's obviously a big thing, but it's something you can fix quickly. It's not going to destroy society. However, many decisions over a long period of time with a narrow viewpoint, because we've surrounded ourselves with folks who have a similar socioeconomic status to ours, it can be really dangerous. You know, living in Salt Lake and working here, and then going to Detroit and spending time there, and then going to San Francisco and spending time there, there's a major difference between the reality and experiences of the people who live in each one of those cities. And I think one of the things that remote work helps to solve is that we can then have a wider variety of people and backgrounds and contexts helping to build products that are better for the world in the end. I am really concerned about how many products are being built by a small number of people, relatively speaking, to the world's population, and not having different realities affect the decisions that are being made. And it's not that people are bad or evil in San Francisco or something like that. That's not the case. Obviously, it's not true. And it's not that people have bad intentions either. Some of the best people I know, I am constantly surprised by the caliber of people that work at companies like Twitter and Facebook and Pinterest and similar companies in the Bay Area. However, there is a very specific kind of culture and reality that exists inside of those geographic locations. And I think remote work can help us do better work, even better work than we're already doing, by having folks from different backgrounds and cities and economic classes and geographic locations and backgrounds and context. You know, like all of those things, it can only make the work better and help us see outside of our own world, which is really hard to do when we're moving so fast and working so hard. It's hard to pull our head out of the clouds a bit and look around us. Those are the things that like seem like the biggest benefits to me. You know, more opportunity for more people, better efficiencies, better work-life balance, better for the environment. Those are huge. Some downsides of remote work that I think are hard to overcome, and I don't think we've found tooling to overcome them yet. First and foremost, and I feel even more strongly about this after rereading Simon Sinek's Leaders Eat Last, and digging into some resources and talks similar to that, which present pretty cogent arguments for how important it is to be physically with other people in order to build the social bonds that allow for happiness in life and really great work, quality of work as a team, not just doing work day to day, but in the small social interactions that take place over the quote-unquote water cooler. These ones are really difficult to replicate remotely right now. The tooling and resources and and processes just aren't there. And some companies are doing a better job than others. Some companies that, like Webflow or InVision, for instance, that have been doing remote work for a lot longer, I think they have more opportunity because they are more well-versed in how to do those things remotely. But most folks who I've talked to have said, we still rely on in-person meetings maybe 2 or 3 times a year in order to really help people form the social bonds that can't be formed any other way yet. And right now, that's not really possible. So it's difficult to augment remote work right now, but that's not always going to be the case. Talking to one of my good friends, Cameron Mall, he said something very wise, I think, which Cameron often does. He said that people should not conflagrate remote work with working remotely during quarantine, because those two things aren't the same. In fact, they're quite different. The pressure that exists right now is not the same pressure that exists under ideal circumstances for working remotely, and one of those small instances is the ability to meet together on a semi-frequent basis to augment the loss of the potential social bonds that are built through in-person meeting. Under normal circumstances, quote unquote, we would be able to do more to make remote work more effective and to decrease the amount of negative impact that remote work has by meeting in person on a semi-frequent basis. And we can't do that right now. Just one example of, not to mention, there are all these other weights that we're all carrying on our backs right now that make isolation through remote work harder. The isolation we all feel right now through remote work is compounded by the isolation we feel in our social lives, with our families, our friends, the people that we can't go see. I have been playing Dungeons and Dragons over VC, and it's great, but it's nothing compared to being there in person and playing with your friends. It's just difficult to replicate those times where you really need to, for your own sanity and for your own mental benefit, to be seeing people face to face. That is not the case for remote work usually. And I think we need to realize that. We should not equate, should we do this long term, with how it's working right now. There's so many other opportunities to build social bonds with other people on a more frequent basis when you're meeting in person. And I think that the primary benefit of working in the same place, in the same physical space as your coworkers, is not necessarily that you can't replicate some of the social interactions over VC or through other ways. It's just the frequency of how often those things are able to happen more naturally throughout the day that makes remote work more difficult. I think that's the primary thing. As far as work goes, what I've seen from our teams is that I think the collaboration that we experience in person is overvalued, in my opinion. What I've seen from most offices is that very often we interact with each other about work, most often either in meeting rooms or sometimes in ad hoc meetings, often when we intend to. And that very often outside of that, you're sort of functionally at home anyway. Your headphones are on, your head's down working on something, maybe meeting with somebody else one-on-one. But as far as a group collaborating together, I think we have romanticized the idea of that happening frequently by being there in person, but that it happens less frequently than we think. I think we can replicate those things by being intentional with how we work remotely. So I feel less concerned personally about that. I'm more concerned about the emotional, social, interpersonal strength of the relationships we have with each other that lead to better work, that are hard to replicate remotely right now. That is the bigger concern to me. There is a great book by Cal Newton called Deep Work, and he talks about the cases inside of work and higher learning institutions where really creative, wonderful new ideas came to be. And one of the things that causes that to happen is rubbing shoulders with and talking with people who think differently from you and who are working on other problems from you, and designers talking to drastically different disciplines and engineers talking to drastically different disciplines. So maybe an engineer talking to a healthcare professional and talking to them about the ideas that they are munching on, or the problems they're solving, and is able to think outside the box in a way that they didn't before, and see how that particular problem and solution may help them solve something that they've been stuck on. Cal Newton argues that lots of things were invented this way, like the internet was invented this way. I think at higher learning institutions, this is more likely to happen. It is more difficult within tech companies, for instance, because there's so many of us that think alike and are working on similar issues and similar problems under similar disciplines, that talking to somebody who does something drastically different from you is less likely to happen than if you're working at a higher learning institution where experts in drastically different verticals are talking to each other. But it is a bigger concern to me than collaborating with your own team is the opportunity to collaborate with other teams. I think those things are things that we can overcome. There are intentions that we can have, and we can build tools and processes and build into ourselves and our organizations, our team's values that help to shape organic decisions, that help us to form social bonds more frequently, remotely even, that help us to cross-collaborate with people who think drastically different from us. I think those are things that we can solve, but there doesn't seem to be a number of easy ways to do that. Certainly not a number of tools that can accomplish this. Replicating in-person interactions over VC through something like random popcorn style VC interactions to run into random people. Like these sorts of things don't exist as well. I attended Mind the Product this year, and it was on a platform, a newer platform for hosting conferences that had the ability to join a place where you would be matched up with somebody else who said, I want to meet someone random for networking. And those sorts of, I think, tools could be useful internal for companies to solve some of these same problems. I feel like I've gone full circle here, where I was totally sold out and said, this is the future of work. We should push as hard as we can into it. And then I felt, after reading Simon Sinek and some critics of remote work, I felt more tempered in my expectations here. But I still think that overall remote work can be a net positive if we can overcome some of these downsides to building social bonds with people we care about in our teams, and cross-collaboration across different verticals to help us think about problems creatively. I think some of the other downsides of remote work right now are inherent to remote work within quarantine and pandemic, not necessarily remote work in general under healthier circumstances. With that, I hope things get better for everyone soon. Hang in there. If you have any other thoughts about remote work, shoot me a note. I'd love to hear your experiences and the things that you have loved or not loved, and any ideas you have on how we can solve those together. Anyway, take care.